Access to data is severely limited by a bunch of different factors. A lot of data is proprietary. They don't give access to data, or they give very limited access to data, but the technical barriers to gaining that data are quite high.
Hello and welcome to the OpenMusE podcast. I'm your host, Mark Adam Harold, and I'm going to have a series of conversations with various people in the project, and we're going to be discussing the problems that we hope we're going to be solving. So I think it's only appropriate in the first episode that we start with the main man, and his name is James. So hello, James.
Hi, Mark.
Hello, James. You are definitely the big guy in this consortium, so tell us a bit about your own role in it and who else is involved.
I am by no means the big guy. I'm the project director, and my role is to keep everything on track across our work packages. I also lead one of the work packages, and each work package, for those of you who are fortunate enough not to dwell in EU project world, a work package is just a kind of a mini project consisting of various data collection and analysis tasks, and usually some kind of communication like this as well. And my background is in musicology. I got my PhD at UCLA in 2015, and then I taught for a while, and then I moved over here to Germany to work as a consultant for seamless market and social research. And it's in that capacity that we got this project in 2022, started the project in January 2023, and we plan to wrap it up this year.
Okay, and there's lots of other people involved, so what kind of institutions have we got in the consortium?
Let's see. Universities, 1, 2, 3, 4. Us, we're a non-university research institute based here in Germany, and a data science startup called Reprex, who, if anybody's the big guy, it's them, because they brought together most of the other partners back in 2021 when the call for funding was released. And then we've got you and Alona, who we'll hear from later in this podcast series, and Tamara in the music exchange and export space, 2 collective management organizations, 3 businesses. Yeah, even I forget the full consortium. It's a lot of different groups, spanning from researchers to business people to advocates for artists' rights, for fairness in the industry, to copyright management groups, the whole spectrum of people involved in music.
Well, we've been using the word ecosystem a lot in this project, and it sounds like that's the wide spectrum. So I have written down here 3 words that we're going to discuss today: competitive ecosystems, fair ecosystems, and sustainable ecosystems. We better start off with discussing the word ecosystem itself, James. So what would be your definition?
An ecosystem is a network of interdependent actors and subsystems. Interdependency is the key, so you cannot separate one actor from all the others without losing the fundamental character of the ecosystem itself. And think here of a biological ecosystem. That's the context in which people are most used to using the word. If you take away the fire-bellied newt or whatever that eats the mosquitoes, then the mosquitoes go wild and suck everybody's blood and everything dies, or what have you, right? So interdependency is the key word. And in the music sector, we've seen kind of a shift from people talking about music industry or music economies to music ecosystems, because the non-economic dimension of music making has become increasingly recognized as critical to the survival of music as a business sector as well. COVID-19 core moment here. A lot of small venues, for instance, in a lot of cities started shutting down, and those small venues serve as incubators for talent. So if the small venues start shutting down, then over a long time frame, the kind of talent that would then populate the larger venues that drive the economy stops growing. And you see these long-term, non-linear cause and effect patterns that characterize natural ecosystems as well. So partially for that reason, people have started talking about music ecosystems instead of music economies to draw attention to the complex relationships that characterize music making, and also to the policy and business need to nurture those relationships.
Okay, and you gave a dark and interesting analogy. But it has been noted in my experience that specifically, like you said, in COVID, you take out one part of the thing, and everything does go down. And in my
Awesome.
city, we've put in some investment, and we have seen a result from that.
Big surprise.
So it's made our city more competitive, quite simply, and we're getting people from surrounding cities that come here to events and come here
And
to
you're
create.
talking about Vilnius.
I'm talking about Vilnius in
Correct,
Lithuania.
yeah.
But it could apply to any city, I think, that invests in its
For sure.
invest in its young people and its new projects. Maybe old people's new projects would be worth investing in. So we're going to talk about competitivity, and I want to know what kind of things OpenMusE is going to be doing to increase the competitiveness of music, maybe compared to other ecosystems that are around or other things that people might be into or spending money on.
Yeah, the key pillars, the three pillars of the project are competitiveness, fairness, and sustainability. And as in any ecosystem context, those three things are also interdependent, right? So when we talk about competitiveness, of course, we're talking about the ability to add economic value in a market-based society. In order to survive, a given sector has to create enough economic value to sustain itself. But we're also talking about the capacity to create non-economic value for people living in the area, the capacity to contribute to the city brand or the country brand, the capacity to sustain talent over the long term, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, so that economic value can sustain over time. So it's a multidimensional kind of concept of competitiveness. And in OpenMusE, we're working a lot with data and metadata. And for those of you who don't know the term metadata, those are data about data. So a given music file constitutes data, right? The raw recording of the song is a piece of data. The metadata that attach to that data include the artist's name, the recording that the song is on, sometimes the production crew, or the ISRC number, for instance, which is a unique number that is attached by the industry to every recording. So there are all of these different metadata that attach to any bit of musical data. And this sounds kind of counterintuitive and nerdy, but in order to be competitive, metadata are critical to an artist or to a track. And the reason is discoverability. So in order to be competitive, an artist has to get their stuff out there, has to get music out there. And a lot of the music search and music discovery process in 2025 is highly automated. And the way that these automated discovery algorithms find music is partially based on the metadata that attach to them. If the metadata are not consistent and well standardized, then discoverability suffers. So in OpenMusE, we're helping artists to improve their metadata in order that their songs can get out there in the market and compete.
Okay, songs in the marketplace. I wanna know a little bit more about culture aspects of it, though. You've talked a lot about music
Yes.
and technology. So how is culture coming into the OpenMusE project?
Well, it's funny, first off, that despite having given the caveat that competitiveness is not just all about economics, my mind immediately jumped back to the economic dimension. It's so hard-coded in us to think about competitiveness in economic terms. But Mark, you're absolutely correct. Another thing that COVID-19, in a dark kind of way, proved by proving the negative is a robust music scene is crucial to quality of life in an urban environment, also in a non-urban environment for that matter, but I'll get back to that later. And in OpenMusE, we're trying to draw attention to the cultural and social added value of a robust music scene by conducting what we call a live music census, which is a project to track the musical life of a city over a 24-hour period. We map all of the music venues in that city from stadiums to the corner pub. We contact those venues, talk to them about what kind of events they run, what their audiences look like, what challenges do they face, how could policymakers help them overcome those challenges. And then we conduct a 24-hour rolling survey of the musical events that they held, the people that go there, their attitudes about the music, what it means to them, also the management's assessment of music on that evening. And then we aggregate all the data and run some analytics and put it on a dashboard. And hopefully, by mapping the musical activity in a 24-hour period, in addition to calculating the economic added value of music on that day, and then via some statistical processes extrapolating the value over the period of a year, we can also derive some really rich qualitative value about how the presence of music on that particular day made people's lives better. And indeed, the qualitative findings show quite clearly that, yeah, people had a great time. They had a chance to meet friends. They met people they hadn't met before. They encountered cultures that they had not encountered before. They saw styles of music that they didn't even know existed before. And all of this data is going to be available on the website and should help us to make the case to policymakers, to industry associations, etc., that a robust music scene is crucial to the cultural competitiveness, if you will, of a given city. And Mark, you helped run this thing, so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I can speak to that. We ran the survey in Vilnius, and a lot of the findings, of course, were what we expected, but the interesting part is the bits that turn out to not be what you expected. And I think one of the main things was that we found out there's a lot of money in the city, and people are spending a lot of money. And they were reporting spending a lot on food and drink, for example. But then they were also reporting that ticket prices are too high to go to music events, and those ticket prices in relation to other cities are relatively low. So this kind of tells us about maybe a cultural difference, that people have got very used to expressing their wealth and having a good time by buying food and drink, but still maybe they're not quite as, let's say, informed about the advantages of paying money for an event to musicians, and increasing the quality and investment in music that way. So it's something that we could then talk to people about by showing them the statistics that, guys,
Yeah.
You're complaining about tickets, but you're also spending a lot more money on food and drink.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, this is just a hypothesis, and a lot more research would have to be done in order to prove or disprove it. But I think that people are internalizing the concept of music as a zero-price good, or a next to zero. And maybe streaming has something to do with this. Maybe the proliferation of ad-supported and sponsor-supported events, of publicly funded events, etc. But
it's the feels like free model.
Exactly, the feels like free factor. And if you asked me, as a teenager, can you imagine a world where music is free? I would have, freaked out and absolutely thought, what a utopia, right? Because I spent every spare penny at the used record shop or on concert tickets. But that utopia has come around to bite us in the ass.
Well, there were people, I'm sure you and I were among them, who predicted it would not turn out very fair. When, let's say, technology companies that have a hell of a lot of leverage compared to a guitarist are basically running the show now. So the second word you mentioned is fairness.
Yes.
Is there anything that can be done? Is this slipping away from us? Or is there some way that we can turn things around and get more money back to the musicians?
Well, it's difficult to point the finger. We all know, people in the industry also, I think average people have a gut level sense that something is wrong when the top 0.01% of artists are flying around the world on private planes and, 50% can't pay the bills by touring anymore. A tour is now, a loss maker instead of a revenue driver. Something is obviously wrong. But it's difficult to figure out exactly what, because access to data is severely limited by a bunch of different factors. Number one, a lot of data is proprietary. Spotify and the big platforms, I don't want to name names, but if I say streaming platform, you all know who I'm talking about anyway. A lot of their data is proprietary. They don't give access to data, or they give very limited access to data for research purposes, but the technical barriers to gaining that data are quite high. You have to be proficient in Python or R or another programming language even to get a hold of it, right? There is no such thing as just a dashboard where you can, 2 clicks, input your favorite artist's name and track their popularity, their market penetration in different markets, etc. Of course, there are services that you can pay that do this for you. But, your example of the guitarist recording in her bedroom studio, she can't pay because even touring is a loss maker. Recording brings almost nothing, fractions of a cent per stream. So access to the kind of data that would allow you to see who's getting paid, what is the distribution of resources in the industry, what is the distribution of opportunity, the distribution of discoverability, because discoverability, as we mentioned before, is kind of a form of capital. It's not accessible. And that's another thing that we're trying to do in the project. We're trying to systematically map out what are the different data sources that could be useful to a music industry, a small fish in the music industry pond. Map out those sources, determine which ones can be accessed and which ones are proprietary, determine of the ones that can be accessed, what are the barriers standing in the way of average, ordinary Joe accessing and using this data in a meaningful way, and then bridging those gaps via open source software that is simple enough for someone with a one-day training session, someone without prior data science competence to use.
Yeah, because one of the parts of the dream of free music was supposed to be that a musician wouldn't need a label and wouldn't need a manager, and therefore could pocket 100% of the income. But if that income is nearly zero, and they need an accountant and they need a data scientist and they need to learn how to program Python so that they can increase their income, then it seems that the dream dies there pretty much. Also, I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts on fairness itself, because a lot of consumers would say it's fair that musicians don't get paid for their streams, because it's not the musician's not having to do any work for that stream. He can be off on holiday while I'm streaming something, so why should I pay him money? So that concept of fairness itself maybe needs changing.
Well, actually, in a way, yeah, you're right, and you're also wrong. We did run a survey in Germany, kind of a pre-survey to the big one that we're going to run in 5 EU countries in March within the project. And the really clear majority of respondents said that, yes, musicians deserve to earn a living wage from their work. The caveat here is it has to be good work. You shouldn't earn a living wage for churning out Kenny G covers on a Casio tone. Or who knows, let the market decide. Maybe there's a market for that. So the problem of fairness, of course, we have to view it through a meritocratic lens. But that being said, there is a widespread realization that something is broken, that people who put in a lot of work and put in good work are not earning the living wage that they deserve. So I think that were you to, well, you don't have to put in a hypothetical case. We are going to run a study on this in 5 European countries. And I anticipate that our finding is going to be widespread public recognition that improved mechanisms for ensuring fair distribution of resources in the industry are needed.
Okay, which kind of leads to the third word, which is sustainable, because as you mentioned, we're not really talking about fairness being supporting poor, starving artists by buying them food parcels. The reason why we're doing a project to ensure that the lower earners are able to grow is because otherwise we've got a broken talent chain, meaning that your Kenny G covers will be the only music that's viable to produce, and there won't be any new ideas, even if someone wanted to invest into them. And all of those new ideas we know come from the people that start off with nothing, right? So how is the word sustainable, which is another buzzword, how is that applicable to the OpenMusE project specifically?
So in a more broad conceptual level, sustainability in an ecosystem context always means diversity and interdependence and clearly articulated dependencies. And indeed, we are pushing toward in our policy outputs, in the policy briefs that we write for the EU Commission and for our national level stakeholders, toward data-based recognition of these simple facts about how ecosystems work. So by indicating to in our policy outputs, like policy briefs for the European Commission or for national level stakeholders, the need for cities and for countries to cultivate a broad-based and robust and diverse network of live music venues, network of small labels, network of small distributors, rehearsal spaces, instrument manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're trying to push for recognition and data-based recognition of these needs. More concretely, the ecosystem context in music also draws attention to the fact that the non-human environment is not an externality. And the most immediately clear example of this is festivals. Festivals have a massive environmental footprint. The logistics required to get everybody to the festival, the logistics required to set up all the staging, the resource use, the waste disposal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Think about something like Glastonbury, and you've got the environmental footprint of a small city. So thinking about environmental impact in concrete terms, not as an externality, but as a fundamental piece of the puzzle, and also as a non-exhaustible resource and as a form of capital, because as the European Union introduces sustainability directives that will impose economic costs for environmental impact, this is going to have to become a more immediate part of the economic calculations necessary to determine whether a particular event or a particular space or other form of practice is feasible. And here again, we have a data problem, because creating an environmental impact report in 2025 is quite expensive. Multinational companies spend hundreds of thousands of euros doing this, tracking their environmental impact, not only within their own practices, but also along the entire value chain, the various suppliers that give them what they need to make what they make, and the various consumers who buy what they make. Tracking environmental impact along this value chain takes specialist competences that are expensive and also difficult to find. We're trying to change this for MSMEs, that means micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, by introducing a software solution that allows businesses to track environmental impact along their value chain to a limited degree, but nevertheless more than what's currently possible, using data that they already have to submit to the authorities for tax purposes. So by submitting data on what they bought and what they sold, you should be able to, based on statistics that Eurostat collects anyway, do a relatively accurate calculation of dollars to carbon, for example, or euros to water usage along the value chain. The idea here is that rather than paying a sustainability consultant 10,000 euros to crunch these numbers for you, you simply upload the accounting trial balance and the software does it nearly for free. So this is one innovation that we're working on within the project. We're focusing on the music industry, also the cultural and creative industries more broadly. But in principle, once the project has run its course, this tool could be adapted and pivoted toward any other industry.
Okay, so that's another thing you've mentioned, which is kind of like I come from the politics world, so I'm going to say democratization, and we have a lot of
sure.
a lot of innovations going on, but the access to those innovations is maybe only for medium and large and huge businesses, whereas we know that without small and micro getting involved, then everything ends up being boring. I'm definitely a musician, right? So is that assumption something which musicians just say because they want to be important in society, or is there actually some kind of science behind music being important?
Oh, there's a ton of science behind it, tons. In multiple disciplines, all the way from sociology to psychology to microeconomics, policy studies, you name it, right? It's hard to bring it all together into one clean package because it spans so many disciplines, and each academic discipline has its own vocabulary, its own way of talking about things, its own methodological toolbox, its own standards of what constitutes proven, what's truth. But there are a couple of good reports that the European Commission has put out in the last 5 years. as part of the whole general policy framework that also funds our project. And if anybody wants a pointer towards some of those reports, feel free to email me. My email address is at the bottom of our project website, openmuse.eu, and I would be more than happy to share.
Okay, thanks, James. Again, I think it kind of became less of a debate when during COVID everyone realized how much they liked meeting people, and everyone realized how much they liked music going on while they were meeting people. And I've had a lot of discussions with other sectors, like cinema obviously also had a problem, but they had Netflix, and it was almost okay to watch films at home, whereas having raves at home, even though people did try, and there was some hologram things going around, none of that really stuck. And as soon as the doors opened again, of course, everyone wanted to come back together, and what did they do? They listened to music together. Is the future looking good? And have you we're coming near to the end of the OpenMusE project, so have you got some confidence that the stuff we found out is going to be good tools for musicians and is going to increase the amount of meeting people and music that's going to happen?
The future is looking complicated. On the bright side, the industry, quote unquote, worldwide has recovered, not just recovered from the COVID, slump, but soared back to new heights of economic profitability and measurable impact on a global socio-cultural level as well. But the distribution of impact, attention, discoverability, and resources is skewed and is, according to the data that I've seen, getting more and more skewed toward what we call in statistics a normal distribution, which is the classic bell curve, where a majority of whatever you're measuring kind of lands in the middle, to what's called a power distribution, which is an upward slope where the majority of whatever you're measuring is over at the very edge of the right hand of the graph where the power players live. And that trend is increasing. And that's not sustainable, both for, mathematical reasons, if you want to look at it as just a numbers game, but also just common sense tells us that 0.01% cannot possibly address the musical needs of the broad population of the entire world, if for no other reason, because it's different. It's a different experience seeing Taylor Swift perform via hologram. Okay, cool, I would also go. But I also want to be standing 2 feet away from some dude thrashing his heart out, sweating on me in a basement every now and then, right? The live dimension of music is crucial.
Yeah, you mentioned being sweaty and sitting in a basement. The last time I saw a sweaty basement, there was a guy at the front who was, I think, deliberately getting kicked in the head and loving it. And now he's the director of the administration of the municipality of Vilnius city. Thanks, James, for making some very complicated things understandable. And I'm looking forward to meeting some other people in the consortium and finding out more specifically what they're doing. But that's a great overview of OpenMusE. And of course, I wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you. And as I mentioned, my email address is right at the bottom of our homepage, www.openmuse.eu. And feel free to get in touch if you're curious about the project.
Perfect. Thanks, James. So that was an interesting conversation with James, and there's more interesting conversations coming up on the OpenMusE podcast. We've got more episodes. We're going to be speaking to Marcel, the former head of the Institute of Cultural Policy in Bratislava, and we're going to be speaking to Alona from Music Export Ukraine, which is going to be super interesting. And there's plenty of other guests as well. So stay tuned, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.